This is Chinmay Dandekar and Raghu Venkatesan. This is our game, Aprende Español. This is a game that teaches middle and high schoolers conversational level Spanish. This panel that you see right in front of here is the title panel, which is seen when the game is first run. From here, the player can go to the level select panel or the options panel. Let's go to the level select panel by pressing play. This is the level select panel, from where the player can be taken to whichever level they want. They can click on the tutorial to be taken to the tutorial panel, so that they can be taught about the gameplay. This is the tutorial panel. The player reads this panel in order to know how to play the game. Now they can also click on the content boxes under each level to learn the specific material for each level. This is level 1. In both gameplay and Spanish, this is the most basic level. In this level, players learn basic Spanish verbs and what they mean. The gameplay includes moving the skull using the arrow keys to the correct box, which contains the correct answer to the question on the top. The white pellets kill the skull if they hit. For example, we have to translate to carry or to wear, which is llevar. So we have to move the skull to llevar. Now let's move on to level 2. In it, players learn the most basic conjugation in the present tense for the verbs that they were taught in the previous level. In terms of gameplay, a new element has been added, the chili. If the skull touches this chili or the explosion it creates randomly, then it dies. Now, in this case, we were trying to get to sucede, which is the correct answer. Due to time constraints, we will not be going over the other levels. So for now, let's go back to the options panel. This is the options panel, where the player can customize the skull that they control. This panel uses the JOADM button class to allow the player to choose whichever skull they want to. There are also 3 objects of the JSlider class that allow the user to determine the color of the pellets that are the obstacles in the levels. So for example, if you move around the amount of red, you can see that the pellet changes color. Now let's go back to the levels. This is the panel that appears when you get killed by an obstacle, like a pellet or a chili. The number of questions you have to answer corresponds to the obstacle that killed you. Pellets, only 1, chilies, 2, and rockets, almost 4. When the player answers the amount of questions correctly, then they can continue to the next level. This uses the JTextField class to get the text that the user enters so that the program can determine if the player got the answer correct or wrong. It also uses JButtons to submit the answer. This is the last panel, the death panel, or in Spanish, fin del partido. If you choose the incorrect answer, then this panel shows up, clearly signifying that you have lost. It uses the JButton class to guide the user to the next panel that they want to go to.
This is Raghu Venkatesan. I'll be explaining the code that we use to code our game. We use 3 different layouts in our game: a card layout, a flow layout, and a null layout. Using our card layout, we were able to add different panels to a container panel, which will allow the user to move between panels to play the game, which allowed us to make different levels that the user could go to, an options panel. We used a flow layout to position the buttons so that they wouldn't get in the way of the questions when they're playing the levels. So the questions could be here and the buttons could be here. And we used a null layout to allow us to have complete control of where all the components were and what their sizes would be. For example, in the options panel, we wanted to have complete control over the size and location of the sliders as well as the buttons and where the radio buttons would be. So we use a null layout there. We also use math methods in our game. For example, here we use math.cosine, math.sine, and some math.pow in order to make the pellets move more randomly and more intricate patterns than in just straight lines. An example of a control structure used is if-else statements. Over here, if the chili is moving for 15 seconds, then the location of the chili resets. If the chili hits the user, then the level resets. Over here, every 1 second, the chili will change its direction. We use three different layouts in our game: a card layout, a flow layout, and a null layout. Using our card layout, we were able to add different panels to a container panel, which will allow the user to move between panels to play the game, which allowed us to make different levels that the user could go to, an options panel. We used a flow layout to position the buttons so that they wouldn't get in the way of the questions when they're playing the levels. So the questions could be here and the buttons could be here. And we used a null layout to allow us to have complete control of where all the components were and what their sizes would be. For example, in the options panel, we wanted to have complete control over the size and location of the sliders as well as the buttons and where the radio buttons would be. So we use a null layout there. The main components we use are buttons as seen here, radio buttons as seen here, sliders as seen here. Then we use text areas as seen here, and then text fields as seen here. And to explain one of them, if we were to go back to the sliders, they represent the amount of red, green, and blue for the color of the pellets. And over here in the change listener, the amount of red is where the slider is positioned in the screen. So if you were to move the slider right, then the amount of red would increase. If you were to move the slider left, then the amount of red would decrease. That's the same for the amount of green and for the amount of blue. And this allows the user to change the color of the pellets to their liking.